Welcome back to another episode of Anthony Meets. The chap I'm going to be speaking with today has a story that you just couldn't make up. As a young child, he met his karate instructor, which led to a sequence of events that resulted in his father shooting the karate instructor dead live on television. But there's no better person to tell that story than Jody himself. Jody Plauche, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me.
Jody, it almost seems strange to say so what happened, but I suppose that's what we have to do. We have to go right back to the start and just hear this story. So you were 10, is that right, when you first met?
I was in fifth grade. I was 10 years old, and our elementary school handed out a flyer to take karate, and I was already playing football, basketball, baseball, and soccer. And so I literally, before I walked out of the room, I threw it in a trash can before I walked out the door. And I remember it. Well, my little brother, he went to another school in the same school district because he was younger, and they gave him the same flyer. Well, my mother got hold of the flyer from him. Well, we started taking karate. She signed me, my younger brother, my older brother, and our neighbor's friend joined as well. So we started taking karate. We went to one lesson, and when we showed up to our second lesson, the guy who was supposed to do the karate lessons didn't show up. He just kind of disappeared, ran with the money. So we thought he was a terrible person. Well, that organization we had signed up with, I think it was called Campfire, they turned the names of the kids over to an up-and-coming karate instructor named Jeff Doucette, who was willing to honor our remaining 9 lessons without being paid. And so they worked out a deal where if we liked it, we can continue for, whatever it costs a month to take karate. And so that's how we first got introduced into Jeff Doucette. So, I mean, there's 2 instances to where we should have never met this man. I threw my flyer in the garbage, and the other guy left. But that's how we got introduced to the man that eventually would sexually abuse, kidnap, rape, and then be murdered by my father.
What a sentence. And I mean, what a life. How do you even begin?
That was a lot in one sentence.
It's a whole lot. But an incredible story. And I know that you have turned it into a force for good. But going back to that sort of first lesson, and you meet this chap, what was he like?
Probably charming would be the word. I mean, we had a respect for him because, he's a black belt in karate. This is his karate school. And, I don't know if you ever took martial arts or anything, but, the respect is like a big thing. You bow with your opponent. It's huge. And so there was that respect. He got that just from the initial greeting. But then he started telling us that, we were athletic. And after a couple of lessons, he invited us to go to the movies, a movie called They Call Me Bruce. And it was because they were going to a tournament, I think in New Orleans, to fight. And he said, we got this fighting team. We go to the movies before we go, have fun. And then we go fight in the tournament. So I think the fighting team was going to New Orleans the next day to fight. But we went out and saw the movie They Call Me Bruce. We ended up leaving the movie theater. My cousin was having a birthday at Chuck E. Cheese. So we went to Chuck E. Cheese. And then Jeff got to meet, the family. And so that's kind of how, and again, he's at this point, we don't know he's a child molester. We just know, he's a fun guy. He's grooming not just me, but the whole family to gain the trust. So when he does start violating me and other kids, that we wouldn't tell.
And I think that seems to be a common thing, isn't it, with pedophiles when they're grooming? They groom the parents as well. How did he do that?
Just by being funny, being fun. Like I said, taking us to movies, my dad went with Jeff and me and my brothers. We went to Houston to a karate tournament. We went to Astroworld. We went ice skating the night before the tournament. So, by all accounts, this guy was was awesome.
Oh, you're okay. You're okay. Don't worry about that.
But yeah, and so he was able to gain my parents' trust. I think at one point he told my parents that, the reason why he loved kids so much is because he was unable to have kids because he had an accident when he was like a little boy, and he was climbing a fence and he caught his scrotum on the fence. And so basically he gave himself a vasectomy. So that kind of made my parents, I guess, boundaries lower. Like they they're not thinking, oh, this guy's having sex with my son. They're just thinking, oh, he loves kids.
Mm. Yeah, it's absolutely petrifying. Here's somebody in a position of responsibility. And I certainly I didn't do karate when I was a child, but I was involved in lots of sort of youth services and different sorts of things, community youth groups and stuff. And youth leaders or people in those positions, they were revered and respected beyond belief by children and parents alike. They were a power and authority. But I wouldn't have imagined he begun molesting you straight away. I imagine that was something that built up over time.
Yes, absolutely. He had at first he had to test my boundaries, and that's part of the phases of sexual abuse. One of the first ones is testing your boundaries, and basically testing your boundaries is doing something, basically touching you inappropriately that can be justified innocently, like tickling. Okay, you might have some creepy tickling uncle who will take his niece and touch her boob, and then if she responds, it's like, oh wait, that's you're not tickling me there, you're touching me. Then you go, oh, it's an accident, my hand slipped. So Jeff did that as well. So it was gradual over time. He had to gain the trust of my parents, gain the trust of me, and it's first my recollection that really kind of struck a chord with me was he was letting me drive the car. He had a 280ZX, and it was a stick shift. So he was working the clutch, he's working the gears, and I'm driving the car. Well, me at this point, his hands go in my lap. Now I got my hands on the steering wheel, driving the car. I got 4 other kids in the car, and his hand is just sitting in my lap. And nothing really happened, but I just thought it was odd that he was touching my penis and just nonchalantly, like it was no big deal. Well, then it went away. So I thought, okay, maybe it was an accident. And I was like, he has to put his hands somewhere. Maybe he didn't realize they were on my private parts. Well, then it happened again. But it was quick. So I kind of dismissed it. But by me dismissing it, that told Jeff, okay, this kid is a good candidate. Because I did not respond immediately to the inappropriate touch. And that allowed him to go further to where he eventually started masturbating me, performing oral sex with me, and then having sex with me. And that went on for about a year.
Shocking. And whenever this is going on, are you thinking, I'm being abused? Or are you thinking, I'm in a relationship? What's the thought process?
Right, so by the time he quit testing boundaries and moved into a full sexual or abusive, raping relationship, I knew what he was doing was wrong, and it wasn't my fault. I had nothing to do with it. I didn't blame myself because my mother had warned me that there were people like that. She also told me if anything like that happens to tell, but it's different when you're 10 and you're in it to tell. And I also tell people all the time, like, part of the reason why I didn't tell is because I knew my dad would kill him, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, and that's really interesting, isn't it? And I think it's important that people actually stop and think about that for a second. We educate our children. Schools are full of education, youth clubs, everything. The education, the information is there. But put that on the shoulders of a 10-year-old who's afraid of consequences. What do they do?
All right, so I changed my philosophy probably 10 years ago. Now, I moved in 1998 after I graduated from Louisiana State University. I moved to Montgomery County, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Philadelphia. And I worked at a place called Victim Services Center, and I did education programs. I would go to elementary schools, and I would teach the children about good touching, bad touching. We called the unhealthy sexual touch secret touching. And so I would teach the children no, go and tell. If anyone ever secret touches you, you tell them no. You go find an adult and you tell that adult. Now, 10 years ago, I came into a different mindset. Like, why are we putting the burden on a child from being molested or raped or sexually abused on the child to do it? No, parent, don't let your child around other people.
Yeah.
I'm not very trusting. You can't live your life not letting people around. But like when you're talking about like coaches and youth mentors, you see those as revered people. I see those as suspects. In order to abuse children, you have to be around children.
Yeah, actually, that's really interesting. And I obviously, I should say at this point, not everybody who wants to be in those sorts of positions are abusers, but certainly that's where we will find abusers. It's in those sorts of positions.
So
Um,
I dedicated my book to Mike Burnett and my mother. All right. So Mike Burnett was the police officer who my mother called when I was kidnapped, and he was in charge of the investigation. And he's actually the officer that pretty much saved my dad's life. He's the officer that grabbed my father and yelled, "Why, Gary? Gary, why?" Um, I dedicated the book to my mother and Mike Barnett, but I almost dedicated it, and I probably should have, to all the coaches who didn't molest me. Because I played sports. I played softball, basketball, baseball, soccer, uh, football, and I had a lot of wonderful coaches that did not molest me. But in order to molest children, you have to be around them.
yeah, absolutely. So the abuse now is in full swing, for want of a bit. I'm not sure how to phrase that. So it's going on. It's happening a lot, and then you leave the state with him. How does he kidnap you? Does he convince you to leave?
Right. So he told me. He said if I can't get the money, because he owed somebody out some money. He said if I can't get the money, I'm leaving. I'm going to California, and when I do, I'm taking you with me. So he had told me that like a month or two before he took me. The day of the kidnapping, he stopped by the house, asked my mom to borrow a car, and said, "Can Jody ride with me?" At that point, I didn't know we were going to Port Arthur, Texas, and eventually Anaheim, California. But when we got in the car, we were supposed to be going one way, and we were heading another way. And he said, "We're leaving. We're going to California." And that's how he ended up taking me.
And how did you feel at that moment? Were you excited, scared, combination?
Probably a combination of both. Um, it was exciting to go to LA. And I mean, because in 84, this is February of 1984, the LA was preparing for the Summer Olympics. So you had like a bunch of Olympic advertisement. I got to see the Hollywood Hills. He took me to Disneyland. So it wasn't like you think a kidnapping would be, because I knew him. We had been in a relationship, for better words. I mean, granted, an abusive relationship, a inappropriate relationship, but we had been in a relationship for a year. So I wasn't scared that Jeff was going to hurt me. I was just wondering if I was ever going to get back home.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that wondering if you were going back home, did you think you were, or did you think I need to escape? Or
No, I thought I was going to end up eventually going back home, and that's what happened. So, I mean, I think I played it perfectly.
yeah. And am I right in saying the police tracked? He allowed you to make a phone call, or am I right in saying that?
Yeah,
And they were able to track.
he allowed me to call collect, which I'm not here to help kidnappers. But if you're kidnapping a child, do not allow them to call collect. You're going to get caught. But he allowed me to call collect, and they were able to trace the time. They trace the call through time and charges. My mother asked for time and charges, and for those who are too young to remember, when you would make a collect call, it was long distance. The other person was agreeing to pay for it, and my mother wanted to know how long the call was and how much it was going to cost. That's what she asked the operator. So when we hung up the phone in California, the operator came back on the phone to my mother and Mike Barnett and said that call was 14 minutes. It was $22, and it came from 425 West Catella, Samoa Motel, room 38, and that's how they were able to catch him.
Wow. And in that phone call, then, what's the conversation you're having with your mom? Are you thinking, "Mom, come save me," or what's happening?
I think that my mother and Jeff had got in an argument. And so Jeff told me, "Call your mom and talk to her and just basically see if she's okay." So I called, and she asked for time and charges. And I said, "What?" And she goes, "Don't worry about it. Let me talk to Jeff." So I really didn't talk to her long. And so I put Jeff back on the phone. And in the meantime, they're going to the neighbor's house, calling the Anaheim Police Department, the FBI, getting them en route. And he was still talking on the phone with my mother when the police busted into the hotel room.
And so that's the next obvious question then. So how did that go down?
It wasn't. That was probably the most traumatic part of the whole experience that I went through. I was sitting on the bed. Jeff was on the other side of the bed against the wall, and I was closest to the door. So when the cops came busting in, first person they're putting guns was in my face. So they came busting in, guns on me. The guys behind them had the guns on Jeff, and a guy walked around the bed, and I remember him going, "I ought to punch you in the effing mouth," as he walked around. And Jeff put the phone down and put his hands against the wall. They took me out, sat me down by the pool, and I never saw Jeff after that again. And I was out there by the pool. I was shaking, and they're like, "Are you cold?" I said, "No, I'm not cold. I'm scared." And they're like, "Oh, well, you don't have anything to be worried about." I'm like, "Well, I'm not scared now. I'm scared because y'all just had guns in my face. I'm still shaking from when y'all just busted in." But they ended up taking me from the hotel. I went to the Anaheim Police Department. They interviewed me probably for 2 hours, took me to the hospital, did a rape kit, uh, basically trying to collect evidence, which is how they eventually caught Jeff. Um, then they took me to like this kid's home for neglected and abused children. I stayed there one day and I flew out later that night. But when I got back to Baton Rouge, of course, they're asking me, did he ever touch you? Where did you sleep? Where did he sleep? What did you sleep in? I'm like, we both slept in our underwear. He never touched me. And it wasn't until a week later, after I had been returned, I got returned March 1st. It wasn't until March 9th, the following Friday, the Friday before the shooting, that Mike Barnett came over with the FBI report, the hospital report, that had spermatozoa on the rectal slide. So all my lying that I had been doing, I was being called out for it. So my mom sat me down and she said, Mike Barnett came over today and the rape report came back positive. And I tried to play stupid. I said, what does that mean? She goes, it means Jeff fooled with you. And I immediately said, yes, he did. But the funny thing about that is when I went to the Baton Rouge Police Department, they questioned me for like 3 hours. They treated me like a suspect. Like I wasn't like a 11-year-old abused, kidnapped child. They were threatening me. They were not nice. And they went back to my mother and father and they said, we've been interviewing abuse victims for many years. And either that man never touched him or he's too brainwashed, he will never tell. And they were wrong on both.
What do you think was the main reason for you not telling? Were you afraid that they would think you were gay, or were you feeling guilty, or what was going through your mind?
I didn't want basically I didn't want to upset my parents. It was easier for me to just shut up than tell.
Yeah. Crazy. So obviously then the next, I think the next natural step then is to talk about when he's then flown back into the state with the police or the FBI.
All right. So Mike Barnett and a guy named Bud Connor, they flew out to Anaheim, or they flew out to California, Los Angeles, and they went and they picked him up. And Jeff wasn't talking. Like Jeff hadn't said nothing for 16 days because he was arrested the 29th, and this is March 16th. And the FBI guy said, hey, look, we can't crack this guy. Good luck. And before they got to the airport, Jeff was already crying and already confessed to molesting 3 boys to Bud Connor. Mike Barnett was in the other rent-a-car. And Bud looked up when they got to the airport. He looked up at the FBI guy and goes, yeah, boy, this was tough. Because Jeff ain't said shit for 2 weeks, but then he gets to the car. Before he gets to the airport, he done confessed to everything. And so through the plane ride, they're taking notes. Jeff confessed to molesting me and 2 other boys, which there were more. He only confessed to molesting me 10 times, which I'm like, this dude is confessing. He is giving a police statement, and he's minimizing the amounts of time. I'm like, no. I found that kind of funny when I went back was reading through the police report and then he asked Mike Barnett if he thinks me and him could be together once all this is taken care of and cleared up. Like he thought he was just going to get away with it, and me and him were going to live a happy life together. I'm like, no. Jeff was going to jail for the rest of his life, and I'm going to tell you why. The same people. Oh, all right. So spoiler alert for the people who don't know the story. All right, so my dad shot him. The news camera captured it. It aired on the news that night. Everyone in Baton Rouge supported my father because he shot a child molester. And my dad eventually got probation and community service. He didn't serve any prison time. But the same people that were in charge of the justice system, the police officers, the judges, the lawyers, those are the same people that were going to be responsible for putting Jeff in jail for the rest of his life. So there's no doubt in my mind, because aggravated kidnapping in Louisiana is no probation, no parole, jail for life. There's no doubt in my mind Jeff would have been in jail for the rest of his life. So Daddy actually let Jeff off easy.
Yeah, absolutely. In my day job, when I'm not doing this sort of stuff, I'm a lecturer of law, and it's hard to imagine in the UK, even though what your dad did probably what any parent would want to do. It's hard to imagine that there wouldn't have been a jail time or such like. Was he worried at the time that he was going to go to prison? Actually, just explain what happened. So they were coming through the airport, isn't that right?
Yes. All right. So you got to keep in mind, my parents had been separated. My dad finds out his son is kidnapped. Then he finds out his son has been raped by this man for a year. My dad was not in his right mind. Okay. My dad figured the cops were going to kill him, but he just wanted to make sure he got the shot off like he won. Like my dad didn't care if he died. He just wanted to make sure he killed Jeff. So my dad was not right mentally. So my dad it was a Friday, and he was at a local restaurant called the Cotton Club. That restaurant was probably less than a half a mile up from WBRZ Channel 2. My dad used to work for WBRZ Channel 2. My dad knew everybody who worked for WBRZ Channel 2, and they would all drink together at the Cotton Club. So it was because of my relationship with the people at Channel 2 that when I was returned to New Orleans, I mean, my flight got in at 6 o'clock in the morning in New Orleans, and New Orleans airport is about an hour from Baton Rouge. Well, Channel 2 sent a crew up there to cover my return because my dad knew the people. He called me. He said, look, my son's coming back. And then they're like, yeah, we'd love to film the return. I mean, WBRZ had covered like my Little League baseball games before. And so my dad knew these people. So the one guy, program director, his name was Bob Shadell. He looked at my dad and said, hey, I think they're bringing your boy back tonight. Not me, Jeff. And my dad goes, no, I think he's back already. And Bob's like, no, I'm pretty sure it's tonight. Let me go call. So Bob Shadell got up. He's a program director at Channel 2, made a phone call to the studio, got the flight information, and told my dad he'll be in at 9:08 tonight.
And that's your dad then made the decision that that's the last flight he's going to take.
So that's when my dad had the gun. He had gotten the gun the night before from the house, and he drove out to False River, which is it's a lake, about 45 minutes from my house, about 30 minutes from Baton Rouge, downtown Baton Rouge. My dad made it. He made it to the river because it was his weekend to harvest, and my grandparents had taken us out to our camp. But when he got there, he called his best friend from a little convenience store, and he turned around and he drove back to the airport. When he got to the airport, he kind of looked around, saw the cameraman, and that's when he got on the payphone. He called his best friend. He was actually talking to him, and he saw Mike Barnett come out first, and he didn't see Jeff and Bud. And so he thought they took Jeff out the back way. And he told his friend, I think they took him out the back way. I don't see him. Then the lights on the camera came on. And that's when the video starts, and you see Jeff and Bud come walking around the corner. And if you look to the right-hand side of the video, you can see the metal detectors, and you can see Ed Buggs. He was the correspondent that was there. You can see him in the background. And then these two women come around the corner behind Jeff and Bud. And once the lights came parallel with my father, he used the lights because he had his head turned. And once the lights were parallel with him, he knew to turn around, and he just turned around, and he was right there. And he just, one shot to the back of the ear. He was dead before he hit the ground.
Wow. And then, so what happens next? Then he's just killed a man live on the news. What happens next?
And if you go to my website, jodyplauche.net, and you can watch the unedited video footage, and you can hear my dad crying. I mean, he's crying, and you can hear him going, And at one point, Bud looks at my dad, and he's like, why in the F would you do this? And my dad looked up at Bud, and he said, if he would have done this to your family, you would have done the same thing too. You don't know. And I guess, that's how he felt.
Yeah. So
from there, they take him to the parish prison. It was a Friday night. He couldn't post bail till Monday morning. They got him I think $100,000 bail, and his lawyer sent him to go stay with a friend for one night, and then checked him into a psychiatric hospital where he stayed for about a month, getting a psychiatric evaluation. And then he came home, and he was home, normal life from there, pretty much from then.
So whilst that's all going on, you're a young child. You've just been returned home from being with this man. Are you feeling any guilt about your dad's future? How are you feeling in this scenario?
All right. So the day I found out about Jeff shooting, or Daddy shooting Jeff, was the next morning. All right. So it was Friday night. Saturday morning, our grandparents were like, get in the car, we're going back to Baton Rouge. And we couldn't figure out why. But Daddy wasn't there. So it was kind of weird. Like we were asking, like, where's Daddy? Where's Daddy? And my parents weren't grieving, but I could tell something was wrong. So my initial thought was maybe Daddy had gotten in a wreck and gotten killed. But my parents, like I said, they weren't grieving. They were just more concerned. And so my mother came to my grandparents' house that morning, and she said last night the police were turning Jeff back to Baton Rouge, and Daddy shot and killed him. Well, actually, I think at the time he was still on life support, so he technically wasn't dead. But she said he killed him because she knew he wasn't going to make it. And they told me, they said, whatever you do, don't watch the news, don't look at the newspapers, which of course was the first thing I did. But I was upset that Jeff had died. Like, I was not happy with what my father did. And just recently, I want to say on Twitter or Facebook, someone messaged me and said, I'm curious, why were you upset that your father shot and killed the man that had kidnapped and sexually abused you? And I texted her back and I said, well, I kind of didn't want people to know. And by my dad doing what he did, like nobody in my school, I was in sixth grade, 11 years old in sixth grade, nobody in my school knew what child sexual abuse was, rape, especially by a man. I didn't want that out there. And my daddy doing that, it exposed it and everyone knew. So I tell people, part of the reason why I think I turned out okay is because I couldn't hide. I didn't keep that secret for 20 years. I had to deal with it at 11, 12 years old. And so now at almost 50, I'm perfectly comfortable talking about it.
Yeah, and people talk about children can be cruel. Whenever that news got out and you're back in the corridors, back in the playground at school, how were the other kids?
There was only one kid that ever said anything negative to me. Let's just call him BM. That's his initials. He's dead. He just recently died a few months ago of cancer, but he made the comment in PE. He said, well, at least I wasn't effed up by Jeff Doucette. And I didn't have to go beat him up. My classmates heard it, and when he got off the bus, he took off running. They were after him. Now, they didn't catch him that particular day, and me and him actually graduated high school together, so, I mean, I forgave him. But at the time of his death, he was serving a 20-year sentence for child molestation.
Oh. I don't even know what to say to that.
Don't make fun of sexual abuse kids. That's the rule.
Yeah, there's a tip, right? So your daddy's arrested. Court case unfolds.
He never went to trial. I mean, they filed a few motions, and then he eventually, at first, had to fire his initial lawyer because the lawyer wouldn't accept the plea deal. They were offering my dad a plea deal with no jail time, and his lawyer wouldn't take it because his lawyer was running for DA, and his lawyer also knew no one was going to convict my dad in Baton Rouge, right? So he didn't take the plea deal with no jail time. So my dad had to fire him. And this, I didn't mention in my book, and I really haven't mentioned it that much, but the judge was his fraternity brother. Okay, so my dad and the judge were friends. I mean, obviously this affected their friendship, but they had previously been friends. And so when I found that that particular judge was on the case, I never worried about my dad going to jail. But the judge had the psychiatric evaluation. My dad hired a new attorney, and he determined that my father was not a threat, pretty much to commit another crime. So he felt that serving him, putting him in jail would serve no greater good to the community. And he was right. Like my dad, I think maybe gotten a DW, like a driving while intoxicated once, and that was the only thing he got after that. So I mean, obviously it was the right case.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite movies by one of my favorite authors is John Grisham's A Time to Kill, and it's such a parallel to that. I mean, have you watched it? Do you agree?
I've read the book, I've watched the movie, and I had an ethics teacher in college told me that I should sue John Grisham because he didn't. And it's in the book, the one that I got. He didn't start writing that until October of 1984. The shooting occurred in March of 1984. So I'm pretty sure my dad influenced his book.
Yeah, I mean, because I had obviously first of all read or seen the film, then read the book, then found out about your story, and it was I immediately connected them all together. So fast forwarding now, we've come through our teens. We're heading into our 20s. What's life like?
It went back to normal. I mean, I ended up going back playing sports. I played football, basketball, baseball, and ran track my senior year. I was nominated for the East Baton Rouge Parish Athlete of the Year, which was won by my classmate, Danielle Scott, who ended up going and playing in 5 Olympic Games. So, that made it a little easier to lose to someone of that high caliber. And me and her are still friends today, but I went to college. I graduated from Louisiana State University in 1997. I ended up getting a job in Pennsylvania and did my safety education. So, yeah, my teens, 20s, 30s were great.
And what about dating and relationships? Did you have any trust issues, or were you able to just go for it? Or
looking back, my first girlfriend, we started dating. I think we dated from 16 to 19. We were together for 3 years. Yeah, I probably had some issues with trust and control. I mean, me and her are still friends today. And then I dated this other girl on and off briefly. And I mean, I trusted her, so I didn't have any of those trust issues. I was already in Pennsylvania, so we had met in college. And I mean, me and her are still friends today. I'm currently single, no children. I haven't had a date in a decade, but I think that's probably by choice. Yeah, I'm content with where my relationship is. I don't want kids. I don't want to get married, so I'm happy with where I'm at.
And
oh wait, other than I'm in my car and I got this sun coming coming through, making me look like I got vitiligo or something.
So I find it really interesting that you're able to speak so matter of fact, and it almost seems like you've kind of removed the emotions from the story. Is that because you've told the story so many times, or is it a mental choice? Or
I think because of, like I said, with Daddy shooting Jeff when I was 11 years old, I turned 12 in April, and I mean, it was in the news for a year and a half because Daddy didn't go to trial or get sentenced until probably a year and a half later. So it was something I had to deal with back then. So now, 40 years later, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, cool. So tell us about the book then.
All right. So I started writing the book in 1993. I would have been 21 years old. I was at Northlake Community College in Irving, Texas, and I just would go to the computer lab after class. I just started just typing it out. And I'm lucky because I didn't decide until 2016 or 2017, okay, you know what? It's time to let's finish this project. So I was introduced to a woman who introduced me to a book writing company, and I signed up with them. And from February to September of 2017, I would meet with her probably once a week for 2 hours. I'd tell her my story. I sent her a link to all the newspaper articles to where she could just read through it and find out what people were saying. And in September, they sent me the first draft. I referred to my mom and dad as June and Gary all throughout the book. Like, I referred to them, Gary said this, June said that. So I went back, and if you look at the very beginning of the book, if you pay attention, I refer to my mom and dad as June and Gary until I'm born. And then once I'm born, when I introduce my birth, then I call them mom and dad.
Why do you think you did that?
So I don't know why I did it, but I went back and changed that too as well to include mom and dad or father and mother. But once we got the book, and I look at it every now and then, and the reporter asked me what took me so long to write it. I told him, I said, look, I said, just like my dad that night at the airport, I knew I only had one shot to get it right. And I wanted my book to be perfect. I wanted to be like a manual for parents and child sexual abuse victims, to where they can read it and gain an understanding of why they felt what they felt, why it happened. And it came out better than I hoped.
Yeah. Jody, it's amazing. I had to speak to you when I heard your story. It just blew me away. Meeting you and seeing your exuberant personality and hearing that you're doing well is such a relief. Because we read these stories and we don't know what happens next. And I'm so happy that You haven't gone on to become another sad statistic. And that's all down to you and your strength and your determination. And I'm super impressed by that. I really, really am. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me. Where can we buy the book?
You can buy the book just go to Amazon.com. The book's available. You can either download it on Kindle or you can get a paperback. And again, I'm not just saying this because I wrote it, but there's a lot of I dedicated my life to gathering the information so I could share it. And there's a lot of great information for parents and for victims of sexual abuse, and even people who just have nieces and nephews to know warning signs and things to look for. And like I said, I'm not just saying it because it's mine, but I think there's a lot of valuable information for especially parents and survivors.
Yeah, absolutely. Jody Plauche, thank you very much indeed